You do everything right. You work the long hours, you save the money, you follow the rules. But every year, it feels like you're running up a down escalator. The house your parents bought on a single salary now costs 10 times what you make. You aren't imagining this struggle. You are the victim of a specific crime. They tell you it's just inflation or market forces. They are lying. The reason you can't get ahead isn't because you aren't working hard enough. It's because the money in your pocket was fundamentally broken 50 years ago. It happened on a quiet Sunday in August 1971. On that day, the government decided to steal your wealth, not by taking it from your bank account, but by changing what the money itself was worth. And they did it without asking you. To understand the robbery, you first have to understand the vault. Before 1971, a dollar bill wasn't actually money, it was a claim check. It was a physical receipt that proved you owned a specific amount of gold sitting in a secure government fortress. This system wasn't just about shiny rocks, it was a leash. It forced the government to be honest. If a politician wanted to fight a war or launch a massive new program, they couldn't just print the cash to pay for it. They had to either raise your taxes or find more gold. It was a golden handcuff that kept prices stable for decades. A loaf of bread cost roughly the same in 1900 as it did in 1950 because the dollar was anchored to something real. But in the 1960s, Washington got greedy. They wanted it all. The massive military campaigns in Vietnam and the expensive social programs at home. They started spending billions they didn't have. They began printing more paper receipts than there was gold in the vault to back them up. It was fraud, plain and simple. They were writing bad checks to the American people and the world, betting that nobody would ever call their bluff. But they were wrong. The bluff didn't last. The world isn't stupid, and the French were the first to notice the math didn't add up. They looked at the flood of paper dollars entering their country and realized America was playing a dangerous game. President Charles de Gaulle didn't want the paper promises anymore. He wanted the real thing. In a move that sent panic through the White House, France began sending naval ships across the Atlantic, loaded with stacks of US dollars. Their demand was simple. Take this paper back and give us our gold. It was a classic bank run, but on a global scale. Other countries saw what France was doing and rushed to the window. Switzerland, Spain, and others started demanding their share before the vault ran dry. The gold reserves at Fort Knox began to hemorrhage. The United States was bleeding wealth at a terrifying speed. The government was trapped. If they kept honoring their promise to exchange dollars for gold, the United States would be bankrupt within months, the vaults would be empty, and the dollar would collapse completely. But if they refused to pay, they would be admitting to the entire world that the dollar was no longer worth what they claimed. The clock was ticking. Advisors huddled in the Oval Office, sweating, knowing they had to make a choice that would change history forever. August 13th, 1971. Friday the 13th. President Nixon secretly summoned his top economic advisors to Camp David. He didn't want the press to know. He didn't want the public to panic. He ordered the phone lines cut. The most powerful men in the world were now isolated in a cabin in the woods, and they had 48 hours to save the American empire. The mood in the room was toxic. You had Arthur Burns, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, puffing on his pipe, arguing that breaking the gold standard would destroy America's reputation forever. He warned that if they did this, the U.S. would look like a banana republic defaulting on its debts. But then you had John Connally, the Treasury Secretary. He was a Texas politician, aggressive, loud, and tired of being pushed around by Europe. He looked at the shrinking gold supply and told the president the hard truth. We are broke. We can't pay. It's time to flip the table. For 3 days, they argued. They debated whether to just devalue the dollar slightly or to nuke the entire system. Connally won. He convinced Nixon that if they were going to default, they shouldn't apologize for it. They should frame it as a victory. They should call it protecting the dollar. By Sunday evening, the decision was made. They wouldn't just pause the gold payments. They would sever the link permanently. They wrote the speech in secret, knowing that when the markets opened on Monday morning, the world as they knew it would be gone. Nixon put on his makeup, sat in front of the cameras, and prepared to tell the biggest lie in financial history. When Nixon looked into the camera, he didn't say, "We're defaulting." He used a word that would become the most expensive lie in American history. He said he was directing the Treasury Secretary to suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold, temporarily. It was a masterclass in deception. The public bought it. They thought it was a short-term fix to fight speculators. The stock market actually surged the next day because Wall Street loved the idea of easy money. But there was nothing temporary about it. The gold window never reopened. That Sunday night, the US dollar stopped being a claim check and became a fiat currency, Latin for "let it be done." It was no longer backed by metal, it was backed by faith, aircraft carriers, and the promise of politicians. This is where the glitch happened. Look at this chart. From 1948 until 1971, If you worked harder and produced more, you got paid more. The lines moved together. Productivity and wages were married. But the moment Nixon cut the gold link, they divorced. Productivity kept going up. Workers became more efficient. Computers arrived. Profits soared. But wages? They flatlined. The extra money didn't go to the workers anymore. Since the money was now easy to print, it flowed to the people closest to the printer. The banks, the corporations, and the asset holders. The American dream didn't die of natural causes. It was murdered on live television in 1971. They call it inflation. You hear that word on the news every night. They treat it like the weather, something that just happens, something no one can control. They blame it on supply chains or greedy corporations or wars in distant lands. But that is a distraction. In reality, inflation is a tax. It is a hidden tax that you pay every single day, but you never see the bill. Here is how the scam works. When the government needs money today, they don't have to ask you for it. They just push a button. They print billions of new dollars to pay for their mistakes or their promises. But here's the secret they don't teach in school. Value cannot be created out of thin air. When they print a new dollar, they are stealing a tiny fraction of value from every other dollar in existence. Imagine you are at a party and there is a punch bowl. The punch is strong and flavorful. That represents your money. Then the host walks in and dumps a gallon of water into the bowl. There is more liquid now, sure, but the punch is weak. It's diluted. That is exactly what happens to your savings when the Federal Reserve turns on the printer. This system destroyed the concept of saving. In the 1950s, you could put your hard-earned cash in a shoebox or a savings account, and 10 years later, it would still buy you a car. Today, if you save cash, you are losing. Your money is melting like an ice cube on a hot sidewalk. This forced everyone into a casino. You can no longer just save money. You have to invest it just to stay alive. You're forced to gamble in the stock market or buy real estate at inflated prices, desperately trying to outrun the printer. And while you are running on that treadmill, the people who own the assets are standing still, watching their wealth grow effortlessly. The most terrifying consequence of the 1971 lie isn't the price of milk. It is the complete restructuring of society itself. Without realizing it, we have drifted back into a system that looks suspiciously like the Middle Ages. Economists have a fancy name for this phenomenon, the Cantillon effect. But you don't need a degree to understand it. Think of the money supply like a river. When the government opens the floodgates and prints trillions of dollars, that water doesn't flow to everyone equally at the same time. It flows to the people at the top of the mountain first. The big banks, the hedge funds, and the government contractors get the new money while it is still fresh and valuable. They use it to buy up cheap assets, houses, stocks, and land before the prices rise. By the time that money trickles down to you in the form of a paycheck, the damage is already done. Prices have skyrocketed. The water is muddy. You're getting the leftovers. This mechanism has created two distinct species of humans. On one side, you have the new lords. These are the people who own assets. They absolutely love inflation because it makes the number on their investment account go up. They get richer while they sleep, not because they are adding value to society, but because they are sitting on the right side of the river. On the other side, you have the new serfs. If you trade your time for money, you are losing. You are running on a treadmill that is speeding up every year. You rent your home from a private equity firm. You lease your car from a bank. You pay interest on your credit card. In feudal times, the serf gave half his harvest to the lord for the privilege of living on the land. Look at your own budget today. Between rent, taxes, and debt service, how much of your harvest do you actually keep? The chains are no longer made of iron. They are made of debt. The 1971 experiment didn't just break the dollar, it broke the social contract. So where does this leave you? You cannot change the system. The government will not stop printing. The debt is too high to ever be paid back. But just because the casino is rigged doesn't mean you have to lose. The lesson of 1971 is simple. Cash is trash. If you are holding your life savings in a checking account, you are slowly bleeding to death. The wealthy figured this out 50 years ago. They stopped saving money and started collecting assets. They bought gold, real estate, and businesses, things that cannot be printed by a bureaucrat in Washington. You need to do the same. The rules of the game have changed, and you have two choices. Play by the old rules and get left behind, or learn the new rules and build real wealth. I can't predict the future, but I can show you the map. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the financial history that schools forgot to teach you. Subscribe, and let's survive this experiment together.